I knew I wanted to go into computer science. I knew I wanted to go that route, but I was more trying to come up with something that was a bit more well-rounded, at least from my perspective. I connected with a couple of people at Lemoyne. There was a gentleman who was on the basketball team. His name's Wright Lassiter. Wright was a junior at the time, and he was from Schenectady. His father literally was the head at Schenectady Community College, and he was really the one that influenced me. His experiences, what he talked about, what he showed me about the school, what it was about, and I felt it would really give me that sort of broader education that I was looking for with a good technical solid background. And Wright proved to be, and a number of the other folks that I met through the basketball program, a pretty solid guy. Wright is the CEO now at Henry Ford Health Systems out in Detroit. I think it's like $6 billion or something like that. So I was very fortunate to run into people like him, and their leadership and their guidance in sort of helping me along that path to choosing a school. So that's how I sort of ended up here in Central New York. I had a very good experience there, good basketball career, and but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to get an education. I had the unique and fortunate opportunity to have that education provided through scholarship. So I consider myself very lucky to have met the people that I met and to have taken the path that I took. It's awesome.
Great. So I see that you studied computer science. What actually intrigued you about technology? What made you interested in going into that field?
Well, there was a number of things. I'll tell you I ask that question anytime I interview somebody. It is my go-to. It's always the last question. I've interviewed a lot of people for a lot of positions over the years. It's my go-to question, right? And so I have to be able to answer it too, because I want somebody to feel comfortable in that situation. And my answer is a couple of things. One of the things about Schenectady is it's a home of General Electric. And back when I was growing up, General Electric was employing, 30,000 people or something crazy like that. It was huge. And so there were engineers everywhere. There were, companies that had spun off of General Electric that were all over the place. So it was a very technical. It was an area that had a lot of things going for it from a tech perspective. I was also very lucky in that my parents were both big into education. My father is a physician. My mother has, had a master's in social work. So I had an experience of meeting people and these were people of color in most cases who were engineers, who were doctors. Obviously, my dad was a doctor, so I met other people who were doctors, who were lawyers. Not a typical scenario, especially when you look at it being that I was growing up in the 70s, right? So that was extraordinarily unique. I was exposed to these people, and education was an expectation and a focus of not just myself, my brother, sister, the whole family, but of everybody around me. So it was culturally a very strong influence from not just the immediate people around me, but almost everybody around me. So again, I feel blessed and lucky that I was raised in that situation. But the other side of the story is the sillier side. I loved video games. I was plunking quarters, because back then you had to plunk quarters into machines to play video games. The home video games hadn't even come out yet. I was addicted. Every quarter I got at the arcade, Pac-Man, Defender, the whole thing, right? Stuff that's that's ancient history now. But that's what got me hooked. I was like, how does this work? And so I got started, writing code as soon as I could. As soon as I had the opportunity to get my hands on a computer, I was trying to figure out how to write computer games. And the thing that I learned really quickly is I didn't have nearly as big enough computer to write computer games, and B, that was really hard, and nobody was out there sort of teaching this stuff. But I took every course that I could when I was in high school, and again, I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have been in a position where my family could afford to do that. I had a computer in 1981. and I actually even remember what it is. Nobody would know, but it's a Texas Instruments TI 99-4A, I think is what it was called. But again, I very lucky, and that drove me, that ability, that going from a video game to thinking about how a video game was actually created and executed, was something that was just, to me, mind blowing. How did people do this stuff? And so that's kind of how I got interested in technology. I was a geek from that point forward. And yes, I have like 9 Star Wars T-shirts that my guys bug me about. So yeah.
Cool. So, when people think of technology, they think of many different areas that you can go into. What exactly is your expertise? What is your area of focus?
Jack of all trades, master of none. The I am currently, my role is around managing development teams. My background is in development. My degree is in computer science. So it's interesting. Back at that point, when you were trained in computer science, you were trained very broadly across programming, really a little bit of electrical engineering, some low-level programming. It was a lot of math, which again, I liked, but I wasn't great at things like discrete mathematics and stuff like that. Still gives me the hives. But it's I took that and learned from that. And what I sort of did is I went into development for a little while. I liked that, but I liked the combination. I felt that I had a bit of a unique area that I thought I could exploit, if you will, which was communicating with people who maybe didn't understand the technology. And so my career moved a little bit more from, hell, I started selling computers, then went into developing, and then ultimately into web development and more managing of developers, which is really what I do now. And it's really, uh, sort of focused on how we get people to tell us what they need, and so that we can build it and having that team have the processes and procedures in place to take that input from a business person who maybe isn't super comfortable with that technology, get them comfortable with what they need and what they're looking to try to accomplish, and have a team on the other side, on the IT side, that's able to understand what those requirements and those goals and those needs are from a tech perspective, and be able to produce that thing. And that thing might be a full-on system that you build, whether it's a web-based system, a mobile-based, or whatever it happens to be, or it might be an integration between two systems. I have a, something I'm doing in this accounting system, and I need to get data over into this, customer relations management system. I got to tie those two things together. So my teams build the pieces that that either tie technology together or that fill gaps for things that you can't necessarily buy off of the shelf. And so, my expertise is again, sort of in that, as that middleman, if you will, between the what's going on in the business and managing that development team that's building those tools.
See, so you kind of talked about it a little bit from the last question, but what exactly is your role as Director of Application Development at Raymour and Flanigan?
Well, there's sort of I guess we'll call it the job description roles, right? Which if you go out and look up, what does an application development manager do? You manage the design and implementation of apps. You monitor and report on the status. You maintain the people, if you will. You work to understand the business functions. You prioritize and sort of schedule projects, and work with other teams and departments. Again, there's sort of a litany of things that I do, but I'll explain it maybe more in a day of the life type of a scenario, right? In terms of, I could give you my job description, but the day in the life is typically, first I'll give you a little bit of the structure of what my team looks like. I manage managers, so all of my team are software development managers. which they in turn have a team, and that team is typically made up of developers, quality analysts, QA, which are testers basically, and typically there are other IT professionals that they connect with, but the development side is usually that software development manager, the developer, and the tester. And on a day-to-day basis, we have assignments that we get um, from the business. So, we sort of break it down into three things. There's a project, there's an incident, or there's what they call a service request. A project is exactly what you'd think. We need to build an X so that we can do Y. So for example, today, what were we working on? We're working on a system to handle price changes. Right? We're Raymour and Flanigan Furniture company, and supply chains. You and I were chatting a little bit about supply chain just a second ago. You said you had a course in that. Supply chains change. Vendor says, hey, I got to change prices. Used to be that had to be done by writing code, literally. We have an older system behind in the back end, so you have to write some code to make that price change. We built a module that makes those price changes. So my software development manager works with the team to help create the specs, to work with the business to make those that module that now allows the business to make that price change themselves versus having to come to us to do that programmatically. So that's an example of building a project and building a system. Others are just simple service requests. We need to be able to run this report differently and have a different column or a different row or a different line do a different thing. It's pretty straightforward stuff. And then it's broken. In the tech world, it's really kind of one of those three things. It's like you're working on a project, you have a request that somebody needs, or something broken, you need to fix it. So we, as a manager of a team like that, am I writing code? No, not really. What I'm doing is I act in a couple of different ways. I'm an escalation point. That's one of those words you probably heard, where if something goes off the rails, if somebody isn't sure a direction to go in, then they bring it to me. I help guide. I don't, I'm not as good a developer as any of my developers. I haven't developed in years, right? But what I do know how to do is ask questions and to solicit and elicit the right answers from those developers. And so part of my job is to ask the questions that maybe I don't get asked to help either a developer directly or that software development manager to make a decision about, hey, I'm not sure which way to go, so I'm coming to you to help me out and figure out which way to go. Again, it's kind of management 101 to a certain extent with a tech flair to it. I mean, I do understand development. I do understand the technologies that we use. I if forced, although my guys would certainly laugh at me, I could actually write some of the code. But it's really about helping people. And again, the unique part about the level that I'm at, having been doing this for 30 plus years, is my guys are managers. They're leaders in themselves. They know a lot. They can do a lot. They can handle a lot. If it comes to me, it's probably a flaming pile of something. It's on fire. It's a problem. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. And so we have to, if it is an emergency, we have to figure out what the best path is. And again, it's about asking a lot of really annoying questions. I do believe that part of my job is to be incredibly annoying to the people that work for me. But that's really, it's kind of what the role is to get and nurture teams, nurture people, get the best out of them, and when needed, provide that buck stops here kind of answer.
Sounds very interesting to me. I see
That's
that you
fun.
work. Yeah, it sounds like it. Let me let someone else in. I see that you work with, other large multinational companies over the years. Can you give us some insights on, your various roles within those companies and experiences?
So when I was, I've really had, three major positions that I've held. I was a developer with a company that doesn't exist anymore, Syracuse, China, for a few years. Then I had 27 years at what was Raymour and Associates, is now Mower, which is the largest independent marketing communication agency outside of New York, outside of Manhattan, and now I work for Raymour. So when I was with Mower, we had and dealt with a lot of larger companies, and what was great about that experience, I did not have a humongous team, but we had, because we had offices in Rochester, for example, which was where Kodak marketing was, and then Atlanta, where Kodak marketing moved with. So we did a lot of work with Kodak. You're now dealing with IT or technical teams that, instead of being 5 or 10 or 15 people, are hundreds of technical people. And literally the verticals went way deeper than anything I had had experience with. And what I mean by that is, instead of having one person that's doing, requirements and architecture and development and, any number of different tasks, you had layers of people each doing a specialty within the technical space. So it was a very different experience. It exposed me to a lot of different work styles. It exposed me to things that we then brought to Mower, and I brought to other organizations about, we didn't even actually have a PMO, a project management office at Mower, until we sort of started working with other larger companies and began to understand the structure of a project management office and how that worked. So those experiences were really critical, especially, a lot of this stuff was going on during the dot-com bubble and things. We could see, we worked everything from startups to, to Disney, which was cool. I mean, we, back then, everything, you couldn't deliver everything on the web, for example. So sometimes we were delivering, CD and interactive content that way, which was fun. Got to work with literally like Disney properties, and we did like interactive maps for Islands of Adventure and back in the day. So it was fun to work with those big brands, but it was also really cool to work with technical resources that were extremely detailed and dedicated in what they worked on. So that was my first exposure to people who had really distinct and unique titles and only worked in a really narrow space, if you will. And so that got me a broader exposure to larger IT shops and how they worked. And the funny thing is, as I had those experiences, the problems that they were experiencing, because everybody was trying to figure out how to leverage the web, how to leverage, digital marketing, how to leverage all of the new things that were coming along. They were struggling with the exact same things that smaller teams were, just on a bigger scale. It was like, you'd think, oh, these guys have it all, this is Kodak. They got to have everything figured out. Then you sit down and have a conversation with people who are trying to execute these things. It might be landing pages, it might be a mailing that we were working with them on, and in some cases they knew less than we did, because this is was our niche, and in other cases they knew more because they had done some other things with some other organizations. So that period of time was a really, really awesome learning experience. I think for everybody. It didn't matter if you were in a small shop, a boutique, a big giant, IT group, because again, at that time, companies were spinning off, and saying, oh, we're going to have this digital arm. And really what they were doing is, in many cases, they were taking IT teams and pulling them out. And, these weren't necessarily experts, because quite honestly, nobody was an expert.
Right.
I mean, when you're creating the first of something, or something that's somewhat original, you're all sort of grasping at straws. What I learned is that the processes that existed to build software were still worked, right? So the things that I learned, and that's I'm sure people that I was in with IT with at Lemoyne would probably say the same things. Things that I learned at that point about a development cycle and how things needed to be built, and the processes that had been around and actually had been taken, quite honestly, from like manufacturing and everything else, still worked. You had to translate them a little bit when you started getting into some of the marketing spaces, because if you start talking to a marketing team about a software development lifecycle, it didn't jibe very well. But if you took those concepts about how a project should, going through a discovery, going through, the steps of creating software, and translated them a little bit into how marketing campaigns and brand campaigns and things like that were created. All of a sudden, everybody began to get it, and the work flowed much smoother when that happened. So again, as you can tell, sort of from the way I talk about this stuff, it was cool. I mean, I I I I had the opportunity, and I noticed one of my colleagues is, an old friend of mine is on this presentation, and I'll shout him out eventually. But I had the opportunity to work through the birth of the internet. How cool is that? I mean, we built stuff that nobody built before. We did stuff that nobody did before. Just it was awesome. I had fun.
Like it.
Yeah.
All right, this next question, I feel like I know the answer to it. I know the answer that you're going to give, but I have to ask. Do you think diversity is important in tech? And if so, why?
I think diversity is important in everything. And so I'm going to sort of answer this in two different ways. I go back to something that I remember Eric Mower, he always talked about, and Eric said it was a huge champion of diversity, and is today, is how important it is to business. Business cannot be successful if it can't understand the people that it's doing business with, right? It's just that simple. If you're trying to communicate with people, if you're trying to work with people, they don't. Everybody doesn't think the same. Everybody doesn't have the same background. Everybody doesn't have the same way that they perceive the world. And so, what diversity gives any business is a broader market share. And again, business 101, what do you want? You want a broader market share. It's really as straightforward as that. And how does that play in technology? Well, technology, generally speaking, you can say, is an interface between people and machines, right? It's that how do we deal with machines, and whether that's robotics, or whether that's development like the world that I'm in, or all kinds of different engineering, et cetera. When you start talking about technology, it's you can't be successful completely without embracing everyone. The perfect example, I'm sure everybody's heard about it and talked about it, is the problem with facial recognition, right? That might be the best example that I've seen of how diversity and technology has done this, how we've missed, right? And for those that maybe don't know what I'm talking about, do a little Googling around facial recognition and diversity, and what you'll find is that many of the facial recognition programs that are out there just fail miserably relative to different ethnicities, because the pathways that the people took, and the people developing the AI and the algorithms that do the facial recognition, simply didn't have the background to think about racial diversity, right? And it's one of those that it's just a good example of where the technology is simply not there. And diversity in people who embrace technology is critical. And you don't necessarily have to. Everybody doesn't have to be a programmer. Everybody doesn't have to write code. There are so many diverse ways and so many diverse avenues in the tech space. It's just, to me, it is a it shouldn't stop anybody. Some people, I'm not a tech person. Okay, a lot of people I know that aren't tech people that are in the technology space. A quick story. The person, I think he's still on, Dan Phillips, is the CIO at Pathfinder Bank. Also happened to have been my college roommate. I believe Dan's degree is in human resource management. And he got started in technology selling, was it cars or insurance? I one or both. And then he and I got working together, and he learned it. I had a degree in it. He didn't have a degree in it. He learned it. He's one of the best technologists I know. It's not about sort of um, the where you start necessarily. There's all different paths into it, and everybody can embrace it and be a part of it.
So you kind of hit on this. You know, when you hear tech, you can kind of get intimidated. You can think it's not for me, or I don't have the skills to do this. And not everyone comes from, you know, a similar background as you, who, you know, that their father was a doctor and it just was in the environment to go to school. And of course, you put in the work, but there's definitely individuals out there who, you know, don't have positive role models to steer them in the right direction and things like that. So from your perspective, how do we get more young, diverse individuals interested in tech and also see themselves within the technology industry as something, as a possibility?
I think it's a great question. So first, tech is not about, it's kind of where I was going before. It's not about writing the code. It can be, if that's your thing. It was my thing. I love it. I still love it. But quite honestly, I'm a manager now. It is. I'm a business person. I understand business as it relates to technology. But there's all kinds of other ways. You don't necessarily have to be a math whiz or a scientific genius or have a tech background. You know, one of my developers right now, she was a kindergarten teacher. Came through careers in code, decided she's going to change
Mhm.
her path. Decided, hey, I'm going this way. Careers in code, boom, and she's one of my developers. I mentioned to you before we started, I was just mentioning that my daughter is heading off to graduate school in the fall, and you know she is. I couldn't get her near math, science, a computer. I mean, other than, you know, she's 23 or 22 and everybody uses tech, but she's a musician. And, you know, a lot of times what we talk about, I'm a hack musician, by the way. She's a real musician. She plays the violin. Is, you know, I'm always amazed at how they delivered. When she was in undergrad, she had concerts and whatnot, and how they delivered music. And she would talk about the people in that space, the music tech, you know, space. So here's a space where you have people who are deeply ingrained in the arts that have sort of embraced that element of technology, how streaming impacts it, how to deliver audio and visual experiences. You're seeing it more in writing, you know, where we look for people who have writing skills, because you have, you know, in the tech space, you have technical writers. So you can, in my mind, it doesn't require you, and I think this is where people get hung up, to be, well, I kind of like the technology stuff, but I really love to write, and boy, I can't, you know, I'm not sure if there's a path. There's absolutely a path. Or I'm in finance. I mean, I'm not a tech guy. I like finance. Well, there's, believe me, in terms of what's driving finance these days, what's driving things is, you know, you don't have to know how to write code to be able to say, hey, I need to embrace tech.
Mhm.
I need to understand it. I don't have to be the ultimate wizard and know how to create it. I need to know how to embrace it and how to use it. So I think getting past the fear for a lot of people is about providing them with examples, and seeing people who maybe have taken a path that they didn't think even existed,
Mhm.
for a world that they want to live in, and getting them to engage at that level. I love talking to people you know, when I get a chance to talk to people in the business, and as throughout my career, that, you know, they embrace, I need to do my job better. You know, can you help me to do that? Yeah. And if they're willing to meet me part way, versus, you know, the ones that are tough are the ones that just say, I don't want to know, I don't care, pick, you know, that. Most people that I meet, especially younger people who are really truly engaged in trying to be successful, they don't have some of the fears that I think maybe a generation ago you saw. So they'll
Mhm.
embrace their need to have technology, and it's part of their lives anyway, and how they engage it and bring it into their worlds whether again that be the arts, whether that be finance, whether that be human resources, whether that be whatever, that's where success can come. You don't have to maybe give up the thing that maybe I don't want to be a pure geek. I want to be a
Mhm.
partial geek. You can do that, and you can be successful and have, in a sense, the best of both worlds.
So I have one last question. What advice would you have for others looking to set off in a similar direction as you?
Um, do something that you are passionate about. It is. It's really an extension of what I was just talking about. It was, um, two things that I was passionate about at that age. I was passionate about basketball. I was passionate about um, computers and technology. Not three. I really, I loved music. So I was in a fun band. We'll say we weren't any good, but we were fun. Um, and it was um, trying to find what my passion was and connect it. And so I was very lucky in that I actually was able to embrace almost all of my passions as I went through my school years and turn that into a career. And I say the same thing, as I mentioned, my daughter is on that arts path. She's going for something I had to look up. I had never heard of ethnomusicology, right? Is where she's going to get her master's in, right? But it's a fascinating study of history and music and people, et cetera. But that's her passion, and you have to find what that is, and hopefully there is a way to connect that passion to an opportunity for career. And in most cases there are. You might not find it right away. Again, some of the most successful people that I know and have met and have worked with and worked for, people were photographers, they were in the military, they were, they took all different paths to ultimately end up where they wanted to end up. And I think that's what it's about. There is not it's not a one size fits all.
Mhm.
It has to be something. You have to have some passion. And I had this discussion a couple of times with people when we talk about goals and what they want to get accomplished. And a lot of times it's like, okay, when you come to work, what percentage of the time are you doing something that you like? What percentage are you doing something that you can tolerate? And what percentage of the time are you doing something you despise?
Yeah.
Right? First of all, you're always going to end up doing something you despise. There's, I've, if I find that job, and I think it might be retirement, then I'll take it tomorrow. But there's a small percentage that they're going to be stuff that you're not fond of. But otherwise, the bigger percentage of what you do on a day-to-day basis should be something that you really enjoy. And um, if you enjoy tech, then it should be part of something that you can embrace. It's something that you can do. It should be part of that 80%. And I'm like, if you're not hitting that 80%, then we need to, this is my manager speak right now while I'm maybe doing somebody's review. We need to talk. We need to figure out how to get you doing that 80% of things that you like. If that's being a developer, I got to get you more development tasks. If that's mentoring other developers, then I got to get you more time mentoring other people. As a manager, I always thought that that's sort of my responsibility, is to nurture that 80-20 kind of, the variation of the 80-20 rule
Mhm.
of making sure that people are able to work on the things and work in the areas and in the spaces that they're passionate about. I think that's critical.
It's amazing, Jim. Thank you. So now I wanted to open up the floor for any questions that you may have for Jim based on his presentation. I see we have one in the chat from Kara, so I'll start with that. Any other recommendations for how people can find the point of intersection between their passion and tech?
Um, that's a great question. I don't know that I have a fantastic answer for it, but you know, I have found that most people, I mentioned people, like one friend of mine who's a photographer, and a friend of my daughter's that I was talking, that she was talking about the other day, really loves design. There's always that angle of, well, is somebody doing it already? So let's find out how they're doing it. How are they matching? How are they, angling photography or design or writing into that text space? So there's a lot of information out there. If you know what your passion is, to say, well, what are people doing out there? And sometimes it's about reaching out to people where you might have a connection or where you think there's an opportunity, and saying, well, I know this person who works here. Let me see if they have any ideas about how I can, I'd like to sort of figure out how I can sort of combine how I do this thing, or how I get into technical writing, or how I can get into to financial tech. Connections are key, to making that combination. But it's not always obvious. I wish it was, because I think if it was obvious, most people would would have, would be living that 80/20 life.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Kara, for the great question. We have another question from Glenn. Describe the ideal and perfect developer. And conversely, what do you find annoying about developers?
I'll start with what I find annoying. We all hate to write documentation, and documentation is probably one of the most important things of being successful as a developer. I love working with developers. Again, at my heart, I write code for fun. People look at me like I got four heads when I say that. They don't let me write code for production anymore. So, if I have a task that I need to do, I actually break out the Visual Studio and write code. So, that's, I am a developer at heart. But I don't know if there's such an animal as a perfect developer, because I have seen successful developers with all different types of traits. But I would say probably the most critical trait for a successful developer is one that can marry the pure, I'm here to solve a problem and write code, with I understand the problem, I understand the person who's presented the problem to me, and take it further than just, they've given me 10 requirements to build this thing. I plug in 10 requirements. That's, that's what I expect out of a junior developer. That's what I expect out of somebody who's just getting started. Here's a set of instructions, execute the set of instructions. When I look at senior developers, and when I look at software development managers and higher level developers, these are people that think critically. They think about strategies, they think about structure, they think about and understand the business, and they understand the people who are there. They're the ones that want to go out. He's like, hey, can I go meet this guy? Can I go shadow this person? Can I watch what they're doing? Even if there's somebody else's role to do that in an organization, typically there is usually a business analyst that's role is to sort of interpret. But ultimately, that's what I'm looking for people. When people ask me, what do I need to do to get to the next level? That's what I talk about. Engagement on the business side, engagement on the side that, I say the business, but whoever's looking for you to create that thing, engagement at that level, and not just execution, not just wrote, hey, I can do it. There's a billion guys out there that can write code in seconds to do a given set of criteria. It's a much smaller group that can actually solve problems and then kill it in terms of writing code and getting it done quickly and efficient.
Thank you, Glenn, for that question. We have another question from Megan. In my experience with writing requirements, the toughest part is cross-communication between business people and developers. Can you speak to that cross-communication piece in tech and how you work with your team or past teams on that portion?
Yeah, I was speaking to that a little bit in the previous answer, but it's critical, and it really depends on the configuration of the teams, right? So in some environments, in the environment that I'm in, we have multiple people that have that level of responsibility. So we have a business analyst whose responsibility is getting those and gathering those requirements from the business and understanding the business. So more than just asking a question of, okay, you want this new screen built, or you want this new app built, what are you looking for to have? They're embedded well enough into that business and understand that business well enough to drag the information, if you will, out of the person who's looking for that thing to be built. So in our world, that's a business analyst. They work with the development team to do that as a as a unit, if you will. In some companies and some organizations, it's a pure developer to business relationship, which is also fine, but it does mean that that developer has to have that skill set. And it's, it can get complicated when you start talking about, the organization I work in is, it's furniture. Like, how complicated is furniture? Well, it has almost its own language, I mean, in terms of how our supply chain works and how our back end systems work and how people in the field work. I literally, when I started working there, built a dictionary to understand, how the language of the business works. And so that's probably the key. And some of it is just time of really truly getting to know the business, and sitting with these people, getting to know them as people and as individuals, and what their challenges are. And then you get better at pulling that information out of them. And once you can pull the information out of them and get a story about what they're looking for, then again, it's much easier for that to flow into something that you create, because you're basically just answering that, the questions that are in that story.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Megan, for that question. We have another question from Glenn. Can you share any moments of truth or turning points in your career where you really grew, like a aha moment, like aha moments?
I don't know if it's an aha moment, but it's an interesting moment, and certainly was a turning point in my career. And this will age me. I mean, obviously, the gray hair does that too. But this was when I was working for Mower. This was about probably 1995. And the Eric Mower sat me down in his office, and I'm not quoting him directly. I'm paraphrasing, and said something to the effect of, "This internet thing, do you think it's gonna take off? Right? Do you think, how can we use it? This web stuff. You're the tech guy." Because at the time, my role was the director of IT. And so I was really about infrastructure, desktops, wires, all that kind of stuff. And, it was kind of funny, because his sort of the way he tied two things together is he knew that it was going to be important in the world of marketing and communication. And he knew it was a technology thing. That's kind of as far as it went. So the turning point was basically with him saying, what we have to do is we have to separate this out. We have to create a separate unit. And you've got to, I was sort of living in both worlds. We were doing a little web stuff, and I was managing the IT team. It's like, you got to give the IT aspect up, and you've got to move over here, and you've got to work on this. And it was tough, because I really did like, and still to this day, enjoy the pure IT side of things, relative to infrastructure. But I made that choice at that point. I'm not sure if I made the choice or he made it for me. Either way, that choice led me down a fantastic path. I mean, you can go back on the Wayback Machine and look at mower.com, which we built in 1995 and launched. I think it was Netscape 1 or something like that. It was one of the first websites, around here. We built some of the first websites for what was then Niagara Mohawk and other entities, Leibold Infocon in Central New York. And it's cool. That path, that was absolutely a turning point. And it was, again, the .com thing was taken off. Startups were happening all over the place. So that was probably the turning point. That decision, that direction, which led me down that path, was awesome.
So we have another one. Okay. So we have another one from Glenn. What's next?
Well, relative to technology in general, I wish I could figure that one out. I'd be working the stock market.
What do you want to do in the future, career-wise?
Oh, well, I like what I'm doing. I mean, ultimately, I think in most cases, you spend a part of your career trying to ascend the ladder, if you will. And you make decisions and choices. I ended up staying with one company for 27 years. A lot of people made different choices. You zigzag your way to, you want to gain more experiences, you want to move forward, and you know, maybe your goal is I want to manage a team, and then maybe it's I want to manage a group, or a larger group. I wanted to, you know, I went down that path, and I was fairly successful at it, and I've had a really interesting career. Um, Now at this point, I'm looking for that, making sure that 80/20 stays where it is, right? So that that I'm working on things that I like to work on, that I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm having fun with it. I'm not so much interested at this point in my career, just where I'm at, of any more rungs on the ladder. You know, somebody wants to come along and give me a CIO position, sure. Would I take it? Yeah, why not? But that's not my goal. My goal is to have that. Um, that balance.
Um, we have a question from Megan. Who was your favorite leader in your journey so far?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. I'll do it this way. There were a number of people that were extremely influential. First and foremost, my parents, and I mentioned early, um, you know, a lot of people. I can't emphasize how lucky I am with the circumstances, you know, that I grew up in. You know, education. So my parents and my father, very influential. That is somebody who was just instrumental in getting me the start and the boost that I need. There were other people that were instrumental, um, for different reasons, some good, some bad. I played for John Beeline at Lemoyne College. John Beeline went on to be, you know, a big time Division I coach, coached the Cleveland Cavaliers for like 5 minutes or so. You know, so he was influential. Eric Mower, who I've mentioned a couple of times during this discussion, extremely influential, in learning from him about business and things like that. Fran Nichols, who was the CFO at Mower, also you know, a very influential person, that I had the opportunity to work for probably about 20 years. A really, just a great. These weren't necessarily technology people. As a matter of fact, you know, other than my father, who was really kind of on the science space, most of the influence and many of the influences were not technology people specifically. They were business influences. They were moral influences. They were cultural influences from various different degrees. I think those were some critical people.
We have time for about 2 more questions. So if you have any more, just drop them in the chat. We have one from Kara. You mentioned how the growth of the internet presented a significant shift for your career. What do you see to be the key shift in digital/tech space that you are going to create new/exciting shifts for people interested in tech now and moving forward?
Um, Again, it's very challenging to predict the future, right? Because if I knew exactly what that slice was going to be, I'd be talking to you about my retirement plan, right? Because I'd be working in how to invest in that, right? But there's a number of paths that I see that are going to be highly influential. You know, certainly, there's a lot of things happening in, you know, the IoT, the Internet of Things, and connectivity, and the integration of pieces of technology. I've always said in the development space, we no longer develop systems. We are, you know, we're much more in the integration space. So how do we make things talk to one another? And whether that's from a, you know, from a Siri to Alexa, you know, everything's got a development interface to it now. And so that path is going to be extremely powerful. And what drives all that? Data, you know, business intelligence, business, you know, data science. I've had a chance to be exposed to that, you know, with Raymour, with a couple of really fantastic guys that do that there. And boy, that's crazy stuff. You know, when you're talking about dealing and manipulating billions of records to pull insight out of those records, is always, data is always going to drive everything. You know, so those are just a couple that I think are going to be, you know, it probably sounds a bit cliche and probably heard it before, but having seen that stuff in action, I can see where it's going. You know, I guess the last one I would say is the ability now to sort of pick a tech and use it without having to invest in a massive amount. So if you want to start talking about machine learning and AI and things like that, the accessibility to those technologies through an Amazon or an Azure for Microsoft or whatever is amazing. You couldn't do that kind of stuff before. Now, if I want to do some experiments with machine learning, I can literally log into an AWS account, click a couple of buttons, and have that kind of stuff at my fingertips. So those things are going to really, in my opinion, change the whole tech landscape.
Thank you, Kira. One last question from Michael. What computer languages do you write in? Is there a language you did not care for?
I do most of everything I do now in C# on the .NET side. That's just because that's the space that Raymour occupies. I've developed in PHP in sort of that LAMP stack in a lot of my past work. I probably what I don't care for, I'm not a big fan of some of the older languages that I had to deal with back in the day, like COBOL and stuff like that. But in modern languages, there's all kinds of great things you can do. Sort of the language that you use can do all kinds of, sometimes it's almost like I use this language over here because it's better for these things. There are things happening in BI, for example, that certain languages are better to and can take advantage of that more effectively. So that's it in a quick nutshell. And Marcus, if there are any questions that are posts that come in that you have and you want to forward them to me, I'm happy to answer them after the fact. And I'm more than happy to do that.
Definitely. Thank you, Jim. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming to the Tech and Culture Speaker Series. If you're looking for additional resources or events, you can visit the Center State CEO website, the same place you registered for this event. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Center State CEO. Also Generation Next, which is a Center State CEO initiative. And if you have any questions about how to get involved with Tech and Culture, future programming and events, you can reach out to our Generation Next email, which is listed here. So again, thank you, Jim, for the amazing conversation. I personally took a lot away from this conversation, so I know the audience did as well. And thank the audience for coming out and spending this evening with us. Have an amazing night.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming out.